So, yeah, let me get rid of that. I don't know why it does that. So did we get to the volunteer army?
Yes,
Yeah, nobody volunteered. And in fact, there was a pretty big anti-war sentiment, even by people who might have been like pro-ally. But here's one. Sheet music was such a big business, especially in the first of all 40 years of that century. I didn't raise my boy to be a soldier. And so there was really, oh, so what does the United States need? They need a draft. But Wilson didn't take this as in, wow, young men don't want to go fight and die in a trench. That's weird. Wilson wasn't thinking, I wouldn't want to die in a trench either. He was thinking, what's gone wrong? If the war is the morally just thing to do, once he made up his mind to ask for war, it became the moral and righteous position. If it is morally just, then what does it say about the people who didn't volunteer and oppose? Maybe you got to. Remember total war. Just a couple months before this was a revolution in Russia. Could it already be starting here? So the United States would initiate selective service. And immediately there were anti-war draft protests. Selective service is a draft. And are these political dissent against a political decision? Selective service has to be an act by Congress, a law carried out by the president. Remember the Constitution. Is that dissent? Or is it dissent? People were thinking at the time. Or is it pro-German activity? And what was Wilson's reaction? It must be pro-German. There must be German spies. Heck, in the previous 40 years before this, there were millions of immigrants from Germany. We trust them? Can we trust these German immigrants now? Are they for the enemy? Almost immediately you started thinking that. So first thing about the draft. It was done by lottery. And so every birthday was given a number between 1 and 365. And they pulled it out at whatever one they picked first. I'm sorry, they just put all the birthdays in. They pulled the first number out, and that would be number 1, whatever birthday that was. And then they would go from 1 to 365, randomly choosing birthdays. The lower the number, the sooner you'd be drafted. So the idea would be it would be random, not arbitrary decision. Now, during the Civil War, it was arbitrary. World War II, they just started drafting. You're a young man, you're ready. And Vietnam, 1969, they started this. 1979, as an artifact of the Cold War, it's still there. Congress passed another Selective Service Act. And that is where all young men should know this, have to register for the draft when you turn 18. And that is a legacy of the Cold War. And by law, if they just initiate the draft, it will go to this random system. Doesn't mean it will, but that's the law now. Is that what we want? Oh yeah, we did this in special topics. What was your number?
I was safe, but I should have been.
And you were right there. And yeah, we did the draft in Vietnam War in special topics. They went off basic training. So here are a couple of the war against war, telling people to register. Here is soldiers, National Guardsmen, break up big peace meeting in Seattle, opposed to the draft. And do not forget this. The draft is a political decision. The United States is claiming we're fighting this war for, I forget the word, democracy. Democracy requires dissent. You have to have it. You have to be able to dissent. So this is a real problem. Remember, now we have total war. So immediately, Wilson made the radical decision, we need social unity. Social unity to rally the people together. And what was the reason for this? It was not any action by Germany itself. It was anti-draft protest. Everyone got that? It's anti-draft. So who is the enemy? It's not Germany. It's those protesting the draft. And so the most important element, remember total war. How do you convince people to accept the sacrifice and also be willing to take on the enemy? Propaganda. The Office of Public Information was created. Anything about this? Raptor Class just clicked on it. So George Creel was a movie producer in the brand new movie capital of the world, Southern California, Hollywood. He was a movie producer. So he would run the Office of Public Information, which was the propaganda arm. The OPI, which sounds really French Revolutions. So it kind of makes me a little bit kind of cringe. They thought a movie producer would be perfect. They produced a bunch of these movies, like Under Four Flights, which are kind of these pretty cheesy, but blatantly propaganda pro-Allied movies. You support the Allies, the Germans are these horrible villains. But that was the thought. I should add, why Hollywood? Why did movie production move from New Jersey, it started there because of Edison, to Hollywood? Anyone here know? It's very easy, very easy answer once you realize it. Anyone knows? Weather. If you film a movie, you want the weather to be the same every day. Southern California, what's the weather? Dry, hot, every day. So you can film and not have to worry about changing, being worried about the weather. Like, oh, that's also rain. Jersey. Instead, that's why Southern California. That in California is kind of like the Wild West. They could do anything they wanted for a while. But propaganda. So back to this. They also hired a number of speakers, and they called them 4-minute men. And they were trying to go out and give these rip-roaring speeches that were not just anti-German. It was also to root out anti-German sentiment within the United States. That they are coming to get you. That anybody could be helping the Germans. Think about all these German immigrants. How do we know they're not spies? They have German sounding names. Could they be spies? Did they really leave the fatherland? Don't they look kind of like everybody else? It's kind of a hodgepodge of people. That's the United States. So what do they want to do? Fear. We talked about propaganda before, but it's immediately fear. Fear of this enemy within. The Germans are listening. The Germans are getting to us. The Germans are winning. Huh? Nothing important. Good way right here. And so they begin to rally up people to look for the enemy within and to be convinced there is an enemy within. And once you convince there's an enemy within, then the people are ready for the next step. At first, it was the Sedition Act, but we'll get to the one that everybody knows. You've read it. You've done this is why I wanted you to do this before we got here. The Espionage Act. When the United States is at war, whoever shall willfully make, convey false reports, false statements, intend to interfere with the operations of the military, to promote the success of its enemies, shall willingly make or convey false statements. It goes on and on. So willfully utter, print, write, or publish any disloyal, profane, scurrilous, or abusive language about the form of government of the United States, or the Constitution, or the military. I like to willfully display the flag of a foreign enemy, to incite, advocate the curtail of production. Do you get the point here? You read that. What did it ban? Let me ask you something. Before they wrote the Espionage Act, you all read now that part. Was spying illegal before that? Spying was just legal. You just go spy, so they needed a law that stops spying. Spying was punishable. Spying in the United States of America was a capital offense. Before this was ever passed, espionage was a capital offense. What could happen to you for espionage? execution. Spying was already a capital offense. What's this law? Huh? Now, what do we call speech against the government? That's sedition. Remember the Alien and Sedition Acts from the 1790s? It banned sedition, speaking out against the government. Did it ban spying? Was that necessary? No. There's already laws that are still on the book today. If you're caught spying, it can potentially be a capital crime. It's federal. You're caught spying. 20 years is pretty much the norm for spying. We got catch spies all the time, usually for money. The Espionage Act. It was to ban sedition, free speech. If somebody wanted to spy, if they really believed it, would an additional 20 years and $10,000 make any difference? When it's already a capital offense and they might get life or death or the death penalty. Well, this stops spying. It's going to have no effect. I think anyone's going to stop spying because of this? That law on why I'm putting it. Take that. But I was putting out that piece of paper. I don't know why. Come on, Tristan. I expected more. So, no, it's not going to do anything of the sort. It was to do one particular thing. First off, let's target German Americans. Yeah. Why? It's easy. An enemy within, someone you can't trust. Let's make somebody prove they're loyal. By the way, how do you prove you're loyal? You're almost exactly right. Do what everyone else is. Yeah, conformity. Social union. If you have a German sounding name, you can be attacked. I'll tell you about this more in a little bit. Thousands of Germans who had names like Schmidt. All of a sudden there's a bunch of Smiths around. Change their name. Because they didn't want to be attacked. So, but then let's get to the next thing. Who's the biggest anti-war group? Socialists. The Socialist Party was big in the United States. And socialists were opposed to the war. Workers killing workers so others could get rich. Attack the socialists. And remember, the fear of bomb-throwing anarchists, and soon we got Bolsheviks coming. What a way to get rid of them. And they're thinking, if the Germans are going to help the Bolsheviks, wouldn't they help the socialists in America and or Britain or France? But let's get to the key element. If somebody really believed in those things, would they keep quiet? Maybe. Who does it really shut up? Let's go back. Let me read this again. For anybody who shall willfully utter, print, write, or publish any disloyal, profane, scurrilous, or abusive language about the form of government in the United States. What kind of people? Yeah, what would journalists going to do? Would they continue to publish? What would most journalists do? Told the line. They don't look at you over that. What do most normal people do if they want to criticize the draft? Would you criticize it? Who enforces this law? What branch of government enforces laws? The executive branch. Can anyone define for me really quick what disloyal, profane, scurrilous, or abusive language is? Anyone define that?
Anything I said.
Anything. So what do most people do? Shut up. What this does is, it's clear. It targets any dissent. Any dissent. It's just going to shut people up. Most normal people don't want to go to jail. They're just going to shut up and take it, especially when they might be attacked by civilians. No dissent. And remember what I told you. Totalitarian state, total control, authoritarian dictatorship. First thing you do, go to war. Get an enemy. You gotta make people afraid, that's propaganda, then you can pass laws like this. Because this shuts people up. Only the most radicalized people will dissent. And be willing to take that. 20 years for speaking out is a long time. You guys haven't been around for 20. And you're just thinking this rest of this period might be a long time. Think about 20 years. I do love the knowing looks that people give, like, yeah, you're right. Moving on. So, step into place. This is a British market, but it's a poster, but it's so good. This is supposed to be for the war effort, but it's kind of scary. So you have all these men, various walks of life, they're trying to show everybody. And then all of a sudden they just kind of merge, not only into soldiers, but what do they become eventually? They're not even individuals anymore. They're just a line. All your individuality is gone, and you step into place. What a great thing for a dictator to do to our country. Go to total war, and you can organize the entire country. Individually, you mean nothing, but together we're strong. Social unity would become the key weapon of authoritarian dictatorships. So, here's a couple posters, and I just put this up there because I just find these ones amusing. I have that one up there. First thing I'm going to say is this artist really liked that model. But secondly, they show some of the ways they do propaganda to get young men to join. And there's lots of ways. Fear is the biggie, but I thought this was so amusing that I couldn't do it. It's playing on young men and all their insecurities. So I wish I were a man, I joined the Navy, implying that you're not really a man unless you're trying. And same with the other one, if you want to fight, join the Marines. But the one in the middle, it's not even subtle about it. I find it just hilarious. What is it saying? She might date you if you join. And I just find that hilarious. But the idea of you're not really a man. And, you know, the way to try to play on people's fear of being embarrassed. But the big thing is hate all the enemies. They do this propaganda, hate all the enemies, without and within the country. So, U-boat, that's in list right there. That's 1918. That's another remember Belgium. Not subtle, is it? Not subtle at all. Fear the enemy. But the point is, once you have this social unity, you're against the draft, you're with that. That's who you're supporting. And by the end of 1917, going to 1918, the country will develop, they called it war madness. And it starts with, the fear of Germans. But I love the indoctrinating a little kid to hate at a young age. Hate is good, but the hell with the Kaiser. It's kind of amusing. Just smiling away. Yeah, hate. But war madness will evolve to attacking Germans. And there would be gangs of ultra patriots, this group called the Liberty League or the Patriot League, that would attack German-owned stores to rough up people with German names, to throw rocks in their window. They would attack them. That's where you get all these people changing their names. Here, once again, prove you're an American. But German atrocities, like Limburger cheese or blood sausage, bloodwurst, sauerkraut, Frankfurters. I like dogs, but not this breed. Thousands of dachshunds are going to be killed, murdered by people. They'll take them out, they'll hang them. As to these German dogs. German shepherds were not that popular in the United States. But still, dachshunds really work. Kill. And other German-ish breeds are just small dogs. You're going to kill them all. And they changed the names of some of these things. Frankfurters. Well, the name that was used a little bit beginning in 1893 for something called hot dogs, so they started calling them hot dogs. Not some German name. Hamburger, German. Salisbury steak. That's a British thing. Let's call it that. Sauerkraut, Liberty cabbage. Dachshunds, either Liberty pups or Victory pups. That's war madness. So on my mom's side, my great grandfather and he came as a little kid immigrant from Germany. They went to Missouri, then up to what they were Germans. today it's now France, but they were Germans, ethnically Germans. They went to a little town called Papillion, Nebraska, south of Omaha. They started a little grocery store, and their name was Cordes. German, very German. And to the Cordises, and he had Cordes's store, a little corner market back when there were corner grocery stores, before there were supermarkets, way before. Little corner grocery store in a little town called Papillion, a big town. And during the war, so according to my grandma, I remember her telling me this story. I never met him back before I was born. Had a big plate glass with the window in front, and it was broke 20 times. They broke 20 times as a sure. And they would scrawl things on the wall, traitor, go back to Berlin, things like that. And so he never did change his name, never did, you kept putting the glass back in the window, paying for it. But that was an example from my own life. I'll tell you another story about him a little bit later. But that was just in Papillion, Nebraska. But these attacks would go all over. They should be similar. There'd be a little bit of attacks on Germans and Italians in World War II, but that was against Japanese Americans. There were some German Americans that were interned, imprisoned during World War I and World War II, but not to the extent that Japanese would be in World War II. So, one of the big targets are going to be the large Socialist Party that was anti-war. To the socialist point of view, it's workers killing workers. Here's a socialist cartoon. Okay, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but here are workers cultivating the war, and what does it lead to? The death of workers, but profits for the wealthy. I'm not sure how it seems to be like it should be opposite. Like I don't know. Moving on. But that was the point. Workers killing workers while the empires and the wealthy get richer. And the IWW, or the International Workers of the World, everybody called them the Wobblies. The IWW, they were the successors of the Knights of Labor. Remember them from Haymarket Square? One big labor union. Sabo Cat, or Sabotage Cat, was their mascot. But the Wobblies were opposed to the war. So here's an anti-Wobbly cartoon from 1918. The Kaiser with IWW for nose, mustache, the Wobblies. So this labor union was opposed to the war, now they're traitors. But it fits in with a bomb-throwing anarchist point of view. Well, can anyone guess a town, maybe a city, 120,000 people during the war, that the Wobblies might be really big in? Butte. In 1917, Wobblies were the biggest union in the mines in Butte, even though the companies did not recognize it. So Butte, America, 1917. Over 120,000 people lived in Butte. Biggest ghost town. Frank Little was an IW organizer, singer, or he wrote songs, a lot of these kind of pro-union songs. Great speaker. He came to give a speech against the war. And he was warned by the local Liberty League that if he comes here, he might get attacked. And he would go and give a speech to 20,000 people would come here and speak. 20,000 people in Montana, that's a big deal then. Think about it, it'd be big now. But these kind of things were posted all over from the Liberty League. Where take notice, this is the last warning, 3777. Anybody know what 3777 comes from? Anyone know? Yeah, the vigilantes. Now, I've told you about the vigilantes before. The vigilantes from Montana Territory, they were the pro-Confederate thugs who not only killed political enemies and some criminals, of course they were criminals too, but they were the ones who probably murdered Thomas Francis Farr, the second governor. But that was a symbol. What does 3777 probably stand for, even though I'm not really sure? A grave or a coffin. You ever seen the Montana Highway Patrol? They still have that on. So, which is just so weird that you would have these vigilantes who were pro-Confederates. First, this is America. And I heard there's a vigilante parade coming. So, moving on, Frank Little gave a speech. And during this speech, he talked about it, opposed to the war, opposed to the draft, workers killing workers. When he went back to his hotel room after a massive reception, a bunch of vigilantes came with the support of local police, drug him out of his hotel room, beat him senseless, tied him to the back of a car, drove him throughout town, dragging him, and then hung his lifeless body from a railway trestle, this very trestle, in Butte. Meaning they lynched him. Everyone got that? They lynched Frank Little. And that's the funeral for him. This was not the only lynching, but this is in Montana. This was the most high profile lynching. And what was his crime? He was opposed to entering World War I. And now that was seen as an enemy of the state, a traitor. So the Espionage Act is going to have a number of political prisoners. Almost every state would have their own Espionage Act. Montana would arrest over 350 people under their Espionage Act. These are 3 people who are arrested: Janet Smith, Richard Wyman, and Theodore Klippenstein. And this is what Klippenstein did. Everyone read what his crime was. That he's going to be sentenced 4 to 10 years. This is Montana. Papers, news, something like news about. And he was a laborer. He didn't have a lot of political power, so he's the easy one to pick on. Probably most people are going to be. 4 to 10 years for that. And remember, we're fighting for democracy. He would serve 2.5. He would be pardoned eventually by the government. There's a little bit of embarrassment by this. That's not much, is it? So what are most people going to do? Shut their mouths. Shut their mouths. So when the United States decided to invade Iraq in 2000, there was a massive run-up, and I mean, there's just no way around it by saying just blatant lies. By saying Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, which they did not. By saying Iraq was helped the 9/11 attack, they were not at all involved. In fact, they were mortal enemies to Osama bin Laden, or whatever. They were lying to their team. And there was the same kind of war madness here. And it was kind of unreal. People were afraid to say 2002, 2003. It just all of a sudden the country was overwhelmingly for the war. I should have one thing that's really funny. About 3 or 4 years after the war, when it was turned into a disaster, it was hard to find anybody who would admit they were for the war. Everybody was for 2003, 2006. Oh no, I never. I was opposed. But France would not support our war. Britain sent some troops. France would not. Because France said, this is crazy. You have no evidence. Be a quagmire. Don't do it. And they turned out to be exactly right. And there was a bunch of anti-French feeling. For example, the state of Montana divested from their retirement funds to each stocks, like French stock, lost like $50 million because of it. The U.S. House of Representatives has a cafeteria, and for staff members, etc. And the House voted a resolution because of their anger for France to change the names of French toast and French fries. Anybody know to what? Freedom toast and freedom fries. That's in the U.S. House of Representatives, and it lasted for 1.5 years. We'll show you, friends. Now, I know that should sound to you pretty ridiculous and dumb and lame-brained, but that's war madness. So, Schenck versus the United States, hard to see it, but it's Schenck versus the US. It would be a court case on the espionage. Schenck spoke out against the war. It went all the way to the Supreme Court. All the way to the Supreme Court. And they ruled that the Espionage Act did not violate the First Amendment. Because the First Amendment says the Constitution should not the Congress should not pass a law infringing the freedom of speech. But not everything is free speech. And they said speech can be limited if it's a clear and present danger. Now, this is hard to define, so they did a ruling. What the ruling said was, it is not free speech to go into a crowded theater and scream fire because you think it would be fun to watch the panic. That is a clear present danger, and therefore not all speech is protected by the Constitution. Now, that simple ruling, yeah, kind of makes sense. You can't cause a panic. But is protesting the draft a political decision the same as yelling fire in the crowded theater? Doesn't it really depend on your point of view on this? Meaning, it's still wide open. That is still the ruling today. Clear and present danger. Eugene Debs, here he is, a cartoon man from prison, was arrested for going against the draft. The socialist candidate, he'd already run 3 times, did quite well in 1912 for kind of a fourth party candidate. He would be arrested and convicted. And at his trial, he refused to participate except for making one statement. And we'll conclude with this. Now, when he talks about prisoners, he's talking about political prisoners arrested for their speech. And it wasn't just anti-war, and I'll show you in just a second. So this is how he would finish. He will not back down from his principles. The war is wrong, and he said this law is wrong. Yes. So he would go to jail. In 1920, he would be the socialist candidate for president. See the pin on the right? That was a campaign pin for him. And he got over 1 million votes for president for his opposition to the war. Eugene Debs. And here is he would eventually be pardoned. Here's for the president. He'd be pardoned by President Harding after the war. He was sentenced to 10 years. I saw this pin at an antique store. I just about bought it, but they had it out there. I thought that'd be kind of cool to have, but it was like $160 or something. And I decided that was a little bit too much for that pin because I kind of figured correctly, where would I ever wear it? You know, why would I wouldn't like to wear it. So I'd look at it and go, that's neat. So I didn't buy it. Kind of regret it that I don't. So women were also in the workforce in a large number. You can imagine what's happening. Women are starting to think, like they literally said, taking man's job. Even though 20% of women worked in factories. You know, women were working, but there we have them as welders, boiler makers. And so women started taking this job, not to the extent of World War II. You see them working on women taking jobs as trains, but the expectation is they would leave these jobs when the war ended. But there had been a fight for suffrage. Remember, we had Seneca Falls and Susan B. Anthony. What about rights? If women are going to take these jobs, especially for the war effort, why can't they have equal rights? Okay, maybe not equal rights, but at least the right to vote, which would be a stepping stone to equal rights. Every progressive candidate for president promised to do something about women's suffrage. Teddy Roosevelt did nothing to push it. Even William Howard Taft, who wasn't really progressive, promised that. Woodrow Wilson promised to fight for this. But he would always say there's more priorities. We have different priorities. Just be patient. When the war began, just be patient when the war is over. No. Women had had enough of being second-class citizens. So the suffrage movement would come to its most direct confrontational stage. British suffragettes, they called them suffragettes, had been fighting for suffrage for 15 years before the Americans did. Industrial Revolution first. Alice Paul, who had become the new leader and a different style of leader than the National Women's Suffrage Association, but we're just moving right to Alice Paul. She went to England and learned and protested for suffrage in Britain and came back and decided direct action. And even though the war was going on, they weren't going to let Wilson get away with it. Around the clock, women would be in front of the White House or wherever Wilson gave a speech or any cabinet members, and they wanted it very formal. They wanted nice signs made that everyone could read. They wanted to make sure that we are not a rabble. We are fighting for rights. So, for liberty, here, Have you forgotten your sympathy with the poor Germans because they weren't self-government? Remember the world saved for democracy. What about the 20 million women in the United States? If the war is about democracy, then make it about democracy. Wilson was furious. And what did many of these happen to them? Women. That's Alice Paul in jail. What law was she arrested under? The Espionage Act. The Espionage Act. And they became political prisoners. Alice, so here's protesting for the political prisoners. Alice Paul went on a hunger strike. Same thing happened in Britain. Went on a hunger strike. And she is going to be force-fed. Force-fed. Now let's be clear about force feeding. Force feeding is not to feed the person who's protesting. Force feeding is a torture. How do you force feed somebody? How did they force feed them in 1918? It's still pipe that's shaped like this. So it got hooked, jammed up their nose, and then down their nose. And then they would dump kind of a egg and kind of wheat gruel mixed together down their nose. Your nose is connected, they jam it down, so they couldn't close off it. And the thought was they could actually get a better connection to the stomach, but it was just, I mean, it didn't want this. It was awful. Being a steel pipe, it's not flexible. It's torture. So they torture. Well, this went on a couple times of this torture, and eventually it worked. Wilson, it was going to be so politically humiliating, he would reverse his position. So the 19th Amendment would finally be proposed as a wartime measure called the Susan B. Anthony Amendment. Wilson reluctantly, I put arrow off for green, reluctantly, but they forced him, direct action forced him. He was not going to do it unless of the bravery of women, but especially Alice Paul, kind of an amazing person. And 1920, the last state would ratify it, the last state necessary to get the 3/4 of the states, Tennessee. And here is Alice Paul sewing in a star for every state that ratified. Montana ratified it. Montana had allowed women the right to vote. 1914, Montana used to be a very progressive state. And so, 19th Amendment. And it's one of the things, and it's easy to do. We take history and we kind of talk about like this event happened. We have the war, and then we have women's suffrage, and then we have prohibition. No, women's suffrage was pushed through because of the war. The war gave the opportunity that women fought for and got it. It was not given to them, they got it. Same with prohibition. There had been a temperance movement, but what about prohibition? And this was seen as a wartime measure. Why should we waste all that wheat, corn, rice, barley on alcohol when it's needed for forage for troops, or for horses, or for food for the soldiers? And so here's one of the ballot measures in states. If you back me, will you back me, the soldiers, or booze? I told you back in the election of 1840. Here, the Ton Rule Association. And not only that, it has more than just helping the Germans. We cause poverty and crime. We are against progress. We rob women and children. And we waste grain. It's a wartime measure. Because of the war, that set the stage for the 18th Amendment, which would be ratified. Now they'll say after the war, we fought this horrible war, the war to make the world safe for democracy, well, let's make a better country. That experiment the grand experiment to get rid of alcohol once and for all. Congress would, 1920 would take effect. Congress would pass the Volstead Act, which would enforce this. I will tell you how they enforced it. It's a very clever way to enforce it. Wartime measure, Volstead Act, prohibition. Hey, let's have one more thing. I'll start a rep for the bell rings. We just get it down. You know what we're missing? A worldwide pandemic. The influenza, or what's known as the Spanish flu. The Spanish flu. 3 big waves. spring of 1918 and the fall of 1918. It's a flu, it's not a coronavirus. There was a coronavirus that swept through in the world called the Russian flu, 1890, 91, very similar to COVID. 675,000 Americans died. If you put that in today's numbers, we're talking about 4 million as a percentage of the population. COVID thankfully was not as deadly. As horrific as it was about 1.5 million in the United States. But 50 to 100 million died worldwide. More people died of the flu than the war, but the war spread the flu. And your age was the most vulnerable. I like to think about diseases, they'll affect either the very young or the elderly. Your immunities are so much stronger. And so when they catch your disease, young people's bodies would react so strong that they would send their bodies to shock and go on. You go to the grave sites. You go to the cemetery in Helen and look at all the young people your age who died in 1918 and 19. Kind of shocking. By the way, the Spanish flu, where did it start? Kansas. So, with that, does anybody know why Kansas? You think anybody during the war is going to talk about the flu? All the warring powers censored flu. So the first place that reported the flu was in Spain. I blame most things on Kansas and or Britain. So we have a couple things to make up. Yeah. Get that info. Try to get that first, and then we'll take it when it's tomorrow. You remind me, like, you're on the train stuff, get someone else to get it. Luke and I will grab an arm and. Yeah, they get. Just want to make sure we got it.